Welcome to The Explainer. All right, today we're going to talk about a word you hear all the time, liberalism. It's this huge idea that has shaped our modern world, but you know what? Its story is way older and a lot more complex than you might think.
When we see something like the Statue of Liberty, which was a gift from France, by the way, back in 1886, we immediately think of a society built on individual liberty and democracy. It's the symbol, right?
But where did that idea really come from? Well, its story doesn't begin where you'd probably guess. In fact, one of the most sophisticated expressions of it existed long before the American or French revolutions ever happened.
Yeah, way before European philosophers were putting pen to paper about individual rights, a really powerful model of a participatory government was already thriving, right here in North America.
It was called the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And get this, it was governed by a constitution, the Great Law of Peace. And we're not talking about some loose agreement. No, this was a formal system that guaranteed fundamental rights that we hold so dear today, things like freedom of speech and religion. The contrast here is just wild. I mean, think about it. While Europe was completely dominated by kings with absolute, unquestionable power, the Haudenosaunee were already practicing core liberal principles. Equality, leadership based on merit, and, amazingly for the time, they made sure women had a real voice in government.
And this wasn't just some weird coincidence. Not at all. Historians are pretty clear that American founders, guys like Benjamin Franklin, had direct contact with the Haudenosaunee. They actually admired their system of government and were inspired by it when they were designing their own.
Okay, so now, let's jump across the Atlantic to 1700s Europe. This is the world that the American founders came from. We're talking absolute monarchs, rigid control, and it was in this environment that the ideas of liberalism really started to bubble up as a challenge to the whole system.
Back then, the name of the game was mercantilism. The state controlled absolutely everything. They'd grant monopolies to their favorite companies and restrict trade. The goal was dead simple: funnel all the money, all the wealth, straight to the king, which of course kept the masses poor and the kings unbelievably rich.
So you can see the problem, right? This rigid, top-down system was what the first European liberal thinkers wanted to solve. They looked at it and imagined something totally new, a system based not on control, but on freedom and competition.
And out of this whole desire for change, two absolute giants emerged. These guys would lay the philosophical foundation for what we now call classical liberalism, and honestly, their ideas would literally change the world. First up, you've got Adam Smith. He argued for economic freedom with this kind of radical idea. He said that if people were just free to pursue their own self-interest, an invisible hand would guide the market. He argued that this competition would actually create more wealth for everybody than a king's top-down control ever could. Okay, so fast forward about 80 years. This other guy, John Stuart Mill, takes this whole idea of freedom and applies it to our personal lives. He comes up with what's now called the harm principle. And it's pretty simple, really. You should be totally free to do whatever you want, right up to the very point where your actions start to hurt someone else.
So that sounds great in a philosophy book, but what does it actually look like today? Well, let's take a super practical example, a law that says kids under 18 have to wear a bicycle helmet.
Now you might think, well, of course, that's for safety. But Mill? Oh, he would have a huge problem with this. He'd argue that, sure, the government can try to persuade you to wear a helmet, but it can't force you by law just because something bad might happen. To him, that's a massive overreach, a restriction on your individual choice. And this highlights a core tension in liberalism that is still very much alive today. But here's the thing. This new world of economic freedom, it wasn't a utopia. The hands-off approach that classical liberals wanted led to some really harsh working conditions and huge inequality. And this, in turn, created a massive split within liberalism itself.
So as this laissez-faire or hands-off capitalism took over during the Industrial Revolution, it created enormous wealth for sure, but it also created just deep, brutal poverty. And it forced people to step back and ask a really fundamental question about what freedom even means.
And this right here, this is the split. Classical liberals say the government's job is just to open the door and get out of the way. But modern liberals argue, wait a minute, for someone to be truly free, the government also needs to provide a ladder, to step in and make sure they have a fair chance to succeed in the first place.
And don't think for a second that this is some dusty old historical debate. No, this exact tension between these two flavors of liberalism is shaping our most intense political arguments right now on everything from healthcare to climate change.
Just take the debate over rent control.
The classical liberal argument is pretty clear. It's a violation of a landlord's private property rights and their basic freedom to run their business as they want.
But the modern liberal argument comes right back and says the government absolutely has a duty to intervene. From this point of view, markets that are totally unchecked can lead to exploitation. So the state has to step in to protect vulnerable people and ensure there's a basic level of fairness and opportunity for all.
So, this leaves us with a central question, doesn't it? Whether we're talking about rent control or public health care or student loans, what we're really asking is, how much should the government get involved to make things fair? It's a debate that pits two very different ideas of freedom against each other, and how we decide to answer it continues to define the world that we all live in.